The comeback is on. It's the comeback you've all been waiting for. David Price returns to the ring. I believe he will be fighting on the Callum Smith undercard of the World Boxing Super Series, which I guess makes sense given his links with Calais Sauerland. I was at David Price's last fight. I was ringside when he fought Christian Hamer, and it was actually a fairly depressing night to attend the boxing. David Price, we all saw him on his way up through the ranks. We saw the hype surrounding him. You know, we saw him taking out names like Audley Harrison and John McDermott and those sort of guys being hyped as the next big thing and a surefire world champion. He's always come across as a great guy, a nice person. But yet again, when he stepped up to that top 30, that Euro to Fringe World level that Christian Hamer represented, unfortunately, he ended up getting knocked out. We've seen it with Tony Thompson once. We've seen it with Tony Thompson twice. We've seen it with Erkan Tepe, and now we saw it with Christian Hamer. Now, Price can count himself slightly unlucky. A lot of those guys, certainly Tepe and Thompson, I believe as well, failed drug tests of some variety after their fights against David Price. And you've got to give him a lot of sympathy for that. But regardless of it, the deficiencies in David Price's game are clear, regardless of whether or not his opponents are guilty of taking performance-enhancing drugs. You're very unlikely to see a less confident, more tentative heavyweight than David Price. You're not likely to see a heavyweight with the amateur background and size of David Price who will not commit to that jab. You know, just taps the jab out there, taps the jab out there. Price, he doesn't have a chin of iron, that's a fact. He also doesn't really know what to do when an opponent rushes him. You know, he's not comfortable when an opponent is looking to close down the range. He's not comfortable when the fight is being fought at a pace. We've seen the gas tank empty. It emptied horrifically against Christian Hamer. It emptied very badly in the second Tony Thompson fight. And you just wonder, is David Price coming back? We've seen him take absences from the sport and come back time and time again. Surely this has got to be the last time. I understand he's 34. That's not too old for a heavyweight, but Price is a few miles on the clock physically, and more importantly, Price is a few miles on the clock psychologically. Understand he's changed up his training setup again. You know, we've seen him with Franny Smith, we've seen him with Lennox Lewis, we've seen him with Dave Coldwell. Understand it's going to be a new setup altogether this time. Whether or not they're going to be able to address the problems in Price's game that have really existed since day one at this stage, I don't know. But it would be interesting to see how Price is campaigned. You know, part of me thinks Price is 34 years old. There isn't time for him to mess around. You know, if he's got any ambition whatsoever in the game, he needs to be involved in real fights swiftly. But another part of me thinks that whenever Price is in a 50-50 fight, or anything even approaching that, even a 70-30 fight, he tends to lose that fight. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a British level fighter, or for being an English level fighter. The difficulty is that when Price came into the sport, and throughout his growth period in the sport, he was always sold and billed as a world level fighter and someone who would get to that promised land. So can he in his mind accept, I'm never going to be a world champion, I'm going to be a British champion? And if he wants to do that, then there are potentially some very, very entertaining fights out there for him. Price versus Ian Lewison, Price versus David Allen, Price versus the winner of Gary Cornish and Sexton. You know, those sort of fights, for me, are winnable fights for David Price, and they're fights that could see him get an English title or a British title. Do we want to see him fighting the likes of a Chisora or a Dillian White or someone like that, you know, who's probably slightly above British title level? I don't think so, because whenever he takes those fights, he ends up getting flattened. Do we want to see him being used as cannon fodder for up-and-coming prospects like a Daniel Dubois? For me, also, that would be disappointing, a disappointing way for him to end his career. So I'd like to see David Price maybe accept that he isn't getting to world title level. I'd like to see him have one or two comeback fights, you know, against the type of comeback opponents you'd expect, and then see him make a bid for the British title. You know, that's a winnable belt for him. I think that's realistic given the attributes he has, given the experience he has. He does do certain things pretty well in there, for a British title level or an English title level fighter. I think he's just got to accept he's not going to make it at world level. Unfortunately, if David Price fights anyone in the top 20, if he stepped in with a Jarrell Miller, if he stepped in with a Bryant Jennings, if he stepped in with a, one of those guys, I think he's going to get flattened, I'm afraid. 3 or 4 years ago, if he was to fight a guy like a Dillian White or a Derek Chisora, I'd say those are 50-50 fights. He would have certain advantages in terms of range, but the problem is he's so psychologically frail now, David Price, that when those guys apply the pressure, as they inevitably will do in their, with their respective approaches to the game, you just can't see him living with them, and you can't see him being able to go the distance given how hot it would be in the kitchen in those sort of fights. So, I feel for David Price. I think he's had a sad career. He's had a disappointing career. I'd like to see him do well, but I just think he needs to redefine what well is in his mind. You get a guy like David Allen, and for him, it would be a dream come true to win a British title. Now, obviously, going to the Olympics, being built as a future world champion, has meant that in David Price's mind, holding that world title is the is the end goal. But if you look at the scene right now, Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, Joseph Parker, potentially the likes of Hughie Fury, Price is just not on that level. It would be a good achievement for David Price to win a British title again. It would be a good achievement for David Price right now to win an English title and a Commonwealth title, and potentially, try and cap off his career by having a few defences of the British title, maybe, clearing out the Nick Webbs and the Nathan Gormans and the Lewisons and Allens and Cornices of this world. And I'm not saying he beats those guys. Guys like Nathan Gorman are very, very good fighters. But, I just think that's the kind of level he's at. And if he was to go into that mix, there's potentially some good fights out there for him. And more importantly, there's some winnable fights out there for him. I assume the level of opponent he will be facing on the Callum Smith undercard will be very, very, very low indeed. And, to be fair, can't really say that's too much of a surprise given the nature of the loss he took last time out. But really, the problem with Price is we've witnessed these rebuild attempts several times, haven't we? We've seen him take a loss, knock out 3 or 4 cab drivers who are literally not even in the top 200 heavyweights in the world, and then step up to that top 30 level. I'd like to see him operating more at that sort of top 100, top 50 level, when you're dealing with more beatable fringe competitors. But at 34, there is an element of you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And with Price's size, with his attributes, he's never going to be like an electric counterpuncher. He's never going to be, a great foot speed guy, etc. So you kind of got to accept him for what he is. He does still, of course, have that tremendous right hand. He's got power in the right hand to win fights, and because of that, there's always intrigue in David Price's career. In a sense, it's like watching an Amir Khan fight. You know that he brings something to the game. You know that he brings a name to the game, and he brings certain attributes. But you also know there's that innate fragility there, which means at any moment the fight could go against him. And whether you rate David Price or not, you probably have to acknowledge that with that as it is, any fight involving David Price probably is a fight that has you on the edge of your seat. So let me know your thoughts, guys. I've seen a lot of unrealistic chatter already. Could he come back and fight Tyson Fury for Tyson Fury's return fight? Seen a lot of stuff of that nature. Could he, try and get David Haye back in the ring if David Haye is looking to have a comeback fight towards the end of the year? I don't think David Price is the kind of guy who's going to look to sign one last big fight and get wiped out for 100 grand. I certainly hope he isn't, because it won't be good for his health. But yeah, let's see him do well. Let's see him come back and win an English title, win a Commonwealth title, fight for a British title. That's the kind of level he's at. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's probably no pressure for him to fight above that level, really. It would be a good achievement for him to cap off his career if he could get a few defences of a Lonsdale belt, in my humble opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, people. Do you like my idea of him resetting his expectations and kind of thinking that a good result here is a British title? Or do you think there's too much build and hype that's gone into his career so far, and that he's not gonna stop, and he's gonna be wanting to get back involved in a big fight to position himself towards world level. Let me know your thoughts, guys. One punch in the heavyweight division, as you all know, can make all the difference. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, do take the time to subscribe. Many thanks for watching.